Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a quick spin through the biggest stories in MMA. And on today's episode, we got a lot to talk about. UFC 309, Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. Let's just get to it. Hello, everyone. Gorgeous George here on the con, and look at the distinguished panel we have for you today. Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He resides in Las Vegas. He's ready to get at it. Danny Segura, the host of Hablemos MMA. He's down in Miami. He told me he's ready to get at it. And the MMA media titan, Mike Bond, the host of The Bonfire. He's in Toronto. He's ready to get after it as well. Cold Coffee is going to handle the ones and twos, another Las Vegan. Is that right? Is that how you say it? I don't know. Let's get going, guys. After almost a 2-year wait, 20 months to be exact, the great John Jones was back in competition. Jones defended his UFC heavyweight title, finishing the fight with a spinning back kick. It was a beautiful technique, no doubt about that. Let's hear your reactions first to the fight and then to the fight ending sequence. Mike, you were there live in person at MSG. Let's start off with you.
Yeah, that takedown early on by John, I think really surprised Stipe, and he maybe could have finished it in that round one. If you saw his tweet after the fight, he said, "Can't wait to get full power back in my left arm." Obviously needs to be reminded that he got a shoulder surgery and elbow surgery during that 20-month break between fights. And he had said leading up that he kind of had lost some power in his upper body compared to previous fights. And I don't know, maybe in his mind somewhere he seems to think that's why he wasn't able to finish it in that first round. Maybe didn't have the same edge on his ground and pound or whatever it may be. But then he went on to the second, went on to the third, pretty much kept the fight on the feet the whole time. And then went in there and finished it with that beautiful kick to the body that was right in front of us on press row. Stipe folded hard, man. He was in agony after that thing. So yeah, that was a nice technique from John. He obviously saw the opening for that from what he said post-fight, trained it relentlessly in the lead up, really credited his Taekwondo coach and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, on the Jones side, I thought he looked pretty solid. You could pick some holes and say maybe like his footwork and his movement isn't the same as it was at light heavyweight during like his absolute prime years. I'm kind of focusing on Jones here and how he looked more so than the Stipe side, where you can definitely lob some criticism and say he looked like a depleted version of himself and not close to the same guy he was when he was on top of his game, defending that heavyweight title over and over. Kind of what I expected in that sense. I didn't really expect Stipe to have a huge chance in this fight. And especially, you know, knowing his big asset, right, as the knockout power, what he's done to some of these other guys in this division. And John Jones, well, you can say whatever you want, but he is durable, man. He's still durable, even at 37, 38 years old. He's hard to hurt in that cage. And if you don't have that opportunity to really rock him with the hands or any sort of strike, it's going to be a real tough night for you. And that's what it ended up being for Stipe Miocic.
Yeah, very tough night for sure. So you said he stayed down extended time, huh? He from that kick, because it did look pretty painful, especially when it slowed it down, when they slowed it down and the heel just dug in on the spleen side, not the liver side, just so people know.
Yeah, you can go look. I posted like the video of the seconds after the finish. It's on MMA Junkie's Instagram and X page. And obviously, you know, the camera on the broadcast is going to John Jones doing his Trump dance. It's not focusing on Stipe in pain in the corner there, but you can see that angle. He kind of rolled over and immediately leaned against the cage. He was hurting from that thing real bad.
Yikes. All right. Danny Segura, what were your thoughts? And convince everyone in the chat room you didn't just wake up, man. Yeah, you always bring the fire. So tell me, what were your thoughts on this fight between the light heavyweight GOAT and the heavyweight GOAT?
I would say that John Jones, at least for me, exceeded expectations, and from the Stipe Miocic side, I expected him to come in much better, and honestly, he kind of didn't live up to what I thought he could look like. So this kind of painted a picture, at least in my head, that man, John Jones looked spectacular, and John Jones is certainly among the conversation of being the baddest man on the planet. I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit, but for a long time, it's always been considered or Ngannou or somebody else outside of it. But I feel like with this performance, Jones just made that conversation a lot more murkier. And I thought he looked great, man. He looked great as a heavyweight. He looked fast. He looked strong, explosive. His striking was there. His wrestling was there. He looked like the old John Jones. And I was really taken away by how much he turned the clock. we've been talking about for a while, like, oh, he hasn't looked good in a while. You know, he only had that fight against Cirogan, which you can poke holes and stuff. But man, this was a really solid performance, and I'm glad we got at least a good 10 minutes into it. So we got to see like kind of the complete package. So yeah, man, Jon Jones is a bad dude. He is the greatest to ever do it, and yeah, I hope he sticks around because he's certainly a top talent today in the heavyweight division.
Danny, in your eyes, did he look good, or did Stipe not looking as good help Jon Jones look even better than he did?
I think it's a combination of both. I thought that Miocic was really gonna come in and sort of exceed expectations, and I thought that maybe Jon Jones, a lot was being made of his past and, you know, his history and statistics and all that, which is fine. Obviously, like, he's certainly a historic figure, but I thought maybe people were in for a surprise given that, you know, he was coming off a few surgeries, hadn't fought in a while. But yeah, I think the combination of Stipe not really looking as great and Jon Jones probably exceeding many people's expectations, I think that put on a performance that just was a perfect night for him. And he even said it himself, if he retires, like, what a way to go out. And I agree, man. There's very few like happy endings in this sport, and this would definitely be one of them if he were to walk away. But selfishly, as a fan, I'd like to see him stick around.
Mm-hmm. Goes, how about you, man? Your reaction to the fight? It's been about 36 hours since we did the watch along, and thank you all for tuning in. But what do you think, man, now that you've kind of digested the press conferences and all the social media?
Well, I think, like, say what you will about Jon Jones, but what he did Saturday night was tremendous, especially in the big scheme of things, right? It's pretty damn impressive. And Stipe, despite his age, the wear and tear, you know, coming off a long layoff like that, he gave you everything he had. I thought we had ourselves a fight. I thought it was entertaining, right? Whether it was the right fight, that's up for debate always. But the two guys showed up and they did their best. They fought, and it was somewhat entertaining. I thought Jon Jones looked a lot better than I thought he would. And to Stipe's credit, I actually thought he had a little bit more fight left in him than what I had thought going into the fight. But that's just what Jon Jones does, right? He finds a way to win. He gives you his best. He's entertaining along the way. Nice little dance that he's doing there. So overall, I think, you know, the card, it wasn't delivering until the very end, but I think it was a nice way to go out. And maybe Mike can speak on this, but the fans walking out of the arena, I think probably felt a little better because of those last two fights.
Yeah, is that true, Mike? Because it was a lackluster card. Let's face it, man. At least that's my opinion. You know, when the pay-per-view started, I was just looking, going, what are some of these fighters doing on this pay-per-view portion? And then, of course, Bo Nickel dropped the ball again. I think he wrestled Jon Jones more in the hallways than he did against Paul Craig. But yeah, get me out of hater mode, because honestly, guys, I wasn't that impressed with either guy. Jones looked good, but he just looked good against the past his prime Stipe Miocic. That's my problem with all this. But I am a hater. Go ahead, Mike. How was the feeling of the arena after these last two fights?
Yeah, it was a little slow. I mean, we saw the reaction of the Bo Nickel fight, right? I think that's when they were like really starting to get a little tired. I think it was basically midnight at that point, and we still had 2 5-round fights to go. So it was just like, oh God, this could be a very long night. And yeah, if you kind of looked right on that main card, all the fights had fairly lopsided betting odds, right? And the fights didn't actually come out in practice. When you look at that on paper, you're like, okay, we might get some like highlight reel finishes. We might get some great performances. And I mean, there was some good performances, but yeah, there wasn't those definitive finishes or anything like that. So yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. That really saved the show. Charles Oliveira and his performance, that 5th round moment by Michael Chandler, and then the main event, Jon Jones finishing that fight. If we had got like what the fight looked like in round 2 and 3 for the remainder of the fight till a decision, I think we're having a different conversation about Jon Jones and all this stuff. But yeah, for him to go out there, land, I think, the 6th spinning back kick to the body finish in UFC history. That's a nice little way to end the show. Yeah.
Okay. Guys, what about, we know that Jones, you know, all of his stats, right? Undefeated, at least in our eyes. Light heavyweight GOAT, title defenses, the numbers of titles that he's had, all that stuff. But at this moment in time, is he the baddest man on the planet, knowing full well that about a month ago, Francis Ngannou, who we all used to hail as the baddest man on the planet, he beat Renan Ferreira. And then, of course, Tom Masvidal walks amongst all these men. He's a pretty badass right now. Who's the baddest man on the planet, Danny?
Such a tough question to answer at this point in time. I do still think that the most skilled and sort of the best heavyweight out there is Tom Aspinall, but he just doesn't have the track record that John Jones or Francis Ngannou carries. So I think right now, if you want to give that label to somebody, you have to give it to an undisputed champion per se. I know that John's title is definitely disputed, but still not an interim champion. So I think it's got to be between Jones and Ngannou. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get an answer to that. But man, it's such a tough one. Like, all respect to Renan Ferreira, but like defeating Stipe Miocic even at 42 just sounds better, just carries a little bit more weight. So, man, I just don't know if I can answer that. I rarely sit on the fence in these shows, but I really don't know if I could answer that.
All right, goes how about you, man? Who's the baddest man on the planet at this moment? You know this is what Dana White is after when he lauds all that praise on John Jones. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think there's always a lot of confusion for like pound for pound and who's the baddest man on the planet. And if it's John Jones, I don't think he's acting like it. I personally don't think he is. I think the pound for pound king right now is Francis Ngannou. I think it's very, very close. That does help that win. When you think about what John Jones been able to do with now having the 2 victories at heavyweight and one over one of arguably the best heavyweights of all time. But I feel like it's Francis Ngannou still, and I feel like it is Tom Aspinall that's kind of nipping at his heels a little bit.
How about you, Mike? You share the same sentiment?
I'm going to say Tom Aspinall, just based on kind of the performances here, right? He's going out there and he's dusting everyone in a minute. These fights are not going long with him. He's just killing everyone out there in a matter of seconds. Shortest fight time of anyone in UFC history right now. So you compare him, obviously he's been the far more active fighter in mixed martial arts compared to John Jones or Francis Ngannou. So I'm just leaning towards it that way. He has the most relevant current ranked wins of those guys. It's hard for me to believe
5 top 10.
Yeah, if Tom Aspinall had fought Stipe Miocic on this night, or Francis Ngannou had fought Stipe Miocic on this night, I think it's a much quicker fight. And that's not to crap on John Jones. He will admit in any interview that he does not have one punch KO power. He needs to take a different approach. He doesn't have the same assets. So it's not really fair to kind of rip on him for just not having that, God-gifted power that some of these other guys have. But he is the baddest man in his own way, right? He's the baddest man in just breaking you down and, doing all that. The other guys, I think, are a little more dangerous, though, in terms of what they bring to the table, in terms of just like being scary. So I will give it to Aspinall right now, but it's kind of like a 1A, 1B, 1C situation almost in my mind.
Yeah, I gotta say though, Mike, you said that that Francis Ngannou was the baddest man on the planet after his win over Ferreira. So wondering like what changed, because for me, I had said Tom Aspinall, and after thinking about it, I think the conversation for me at least has gotten tougher. So I'm wondering like what has changed for you.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of seeing how this fight played out and kind of looking in my mind and seeing, like what would have happened if these other guys were fighting the different competition. And it's all fictional, obviously. It's even what does baddest man on the planet even mean? It's more fictional than pound for pound or anything like that in my mind. So I don't know, like maybe it is just recency bias, even though Tom didn't fight and these other 2 guys did, and you're still putting him ahead. But yeah, I mean, as I said, it's very close. It's one of those things that can kind of change on the fly. But yeah, I'm just thinking if you put Tom in the cage with Renan Ferreira on that night or with Stipe Miocic on that night, I think even though both guys got finishes, Tom probably does it in a more destructive and violent fashion.
Yeah, and guys, even though he didn't fight recently, I mean, I guess July was recent. I just am an admirer of Aspinall, what he did to Curtis Blades so quick and what he did to Sergey Pavlovich so quick. And like Mike said, I don't think one fight's ended outside of the first round. Some of them don't even get outside the first minute. He's really 7-0 because of that TKO loss, which was due to injury. So he hasn't even lost in the UFC. He's lost outside the UFC, but not even in the UFC. And again, it's not Ngannou's fault who he has to fight, but I think Renan Ferreira was a pretty decent opponent. And he disposed of him pretty quick. He used his wrestling in that one. And then John Jones, he's got his talents. That reach is incredible because he nullified Stipe Miocic. He could never get that right hand winding up, A, because he's slowed down, but B, because John does a good job of just sticking that hand in your face. It's a good tactic as long as he's not using the fingers, but it really does nullify the other guy.
And
But yeah, man, Aspinall's brilliant, man. He really is. Go ahead, Mike.
And what's the criticism of him right now, right? Like, obviously, the other two guys have more time in the sport and more fights and things like that. But if you want to go through the resumes, you can talk about the close fights John Jones has had, arguable losses to like the Dominic Reyes and stuff. There's the horrible Francis Ngannou versus Derek Lewis fight. Where's that like moment in Tom Aspinall's resume, right? His only blemish in the UFC is when he blew out his knee 15 seconds into a fight. And we saw what happened when him and Curtis Blades ran it back. It wasn't even a fight, really. It was a complete destruction. So he doesn't really have that. And, again, only 9 fights in the UFC. So there just isn't that same track record or opportunity to have a fight like that. But from what he's had put in front of him so far, it's been brutal, nasty stuff. So yeah, that's kind of why it elevates him a little bit in my mind, but it's close, man. It's definitely close.
Goes, what were you going to chime in?
I was going to throw a curveball if you're okay with it.
Sure.
Who do you think would have won between Renan Ferreira and Stipe Miocic? Because I'm thinking about what Mike's kind of going through in his head. And as I'm watching what Cold Coffee's putting up there, and I'm watching Tom Aspinall, I'm looking at the speed at what he's doing. And then you have what John Jones did, and you're kind of going through your head. All these things kind of play out because it is fiction land, right? But who do you think would have won if those two
Okay,
fought?
I'll let Mike answer and Danny answer. But real quick, I think Renan Ferreira, prior to getting waxed by Ngannou, was on the type of role where he could have beaten Miocic. I also think Sergey Pavlovich was kind of on that role where he might have beat him as well. Maybe Volkov dismantling him, not with one punch power. But guys, what do you guys think? Because Stipe looked old out there.
Yeah, I think Renan Ferreira beat Stipe. Stipe just looked very, very slow. His reaction time, I mean, he would get jabbed, and then it wasn't even sneaky jabs. Like, he just didn't see them coming. He looked well past his prime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree. This version on this night, Renan Ferreira probably wins, but 95% of Stipe Miocic's career, I think he wins that fight.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Now, listen, we do have some answers because there was thoughts that we know Miocic retired, and we'll get to that in a second, about John Jones, right? What might be next for him, but is he going to retire? Is he going to lay down the gloves? Well, we have some answers for you. Let's play some footage from New York City post-fight when he's talking to Joe Rogan.
And as far as my future in the octagon, I decided that maybe I will not retire, and that I have some conversations to have with Dana and Hunter, and we have some negotiating to do. And if everything goes right, maybe we'll give you guys what you want to see.
And what would that be? Is that heavyweight, or is that Alex Pereira at heavyweight? What is that? What are you thinking?
I know that we have options. And so I'm just going to see what Uncle Dana wants, and what Uncle Hunter wants, and you guys will hear about it soon, I'm sure. I also want to say a big thank you to President Donald Trump for being here tonight. Can I get a yeah? Hey, what do you guys think about my version of the Donald Trump? Check it out. USA, let's go. That's what I like. I'm proud to be a great American champion. I'm proud to be a Christian American champion.
Well, John, as always, it was an honor to call your fight. Whatever you do next, I can't wait. I'll be here for it. Congratulations to you, sir. The greatest of all time, ladies and gentlemen, John Jones.
Sounds like he's sticking around, but he definitely wants to get paid. And I think let's just jump to the queue here. Mike, clarify me if I'm not wrong. He said Dana White is open to making the Aspinall fight, and I think he's seeing the numbers. This could be a massive fight. And then apparently he might be open to Jones versus Pereira, which is what Jones wanted, but it's got to go through Aspinall. Does that sound right?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't think he said he wants to make Aspinall versus Jones. He said he is going to make it, and it's going to be the biggest fight in heavyweight history, and even said it might be the biggest fight in UFC history, period, which is obviously a bold thing. But yeah, Dana is setting the table for this. I'm sure we'll get into it a little more, but the way he spoke at that post-fight press conference about a Jones versus Aspinall fight from Dana White's side, he really is almost kind of backing himself into a corner, right? If we don't get this fight, it's going to be a bad look for the UFC after they failed to make Jones versus Ngannou. I kind of wrote this in my post-fight column. Dana said like his two big mistakes or things that like failures maybe as UFC president were not signing Fedor Emelianenko and not making Jones versus Ngannou. So those are both in the heavyweight division, of course. And if you kind of have a third fumble with this fight, I think we really got to start asking questions about like how damaged has the potential history of the heavyweight division been by the inability to get some of these marquee fights and names done.
Mm-hmm. All right, so goes. We know some more info. And by the way, I'm not here to plug things. It's not my job, but because it's relevant, check out Tom Aspinall's YouTube channel. I thought he did a great job, man. It was really interesting. I think it'll make him more interesting to you if you're looking for new fighters to be fans of. But he discusses that post-fight, Hunter and Dana White go into a meeting, and apparently it's with Jones, and then later on he goes into a meeting with Aspinall. He says big announcements coming soon, so this thing might be moving a lot faster than we think. But goes, where would you like to see this fight if it goes down? Jolly old England, Las Vegas? I ain't waiting one whole year until they go back to Madison Square Garden, but take it from here.
Yeah, no, I mean, England would be fantastic. I don't think John Jones goes there. I think it's got to be here in Las Vegas. I think that would probably be the spot to do it, although you better put that Secret Service on John Jones just to make sure he's okay. But I thought what John Jones said was actually pretty brilliant, and it's kind of alluding to what Mike pointed out there. Like, he kind of put everything on the UFC, right? His verbiage, like, I'll do it, but I need to get paid. And the UFC is kind of in that position where they don't want to be the guys that are, I think they bit off more than they could chew, because they don't want to be the guys that didn't make this big fight happen. Right now, if John Jones serious about what he's saying, maybe if he can get that ridiculous money, maybe he would do it. You know, in post-fight, it seemed like he just wasn't very interested in it. But the UFC, they kind of dropped the ball there with Francis Ngannou, right? Do you want to be responsible for doing that again? And I think Dana went so hard in on this is the fight that has to happen that now he's stuck. It comes down to really what are John Jones' demands? How ridiculous are they going to be? Because it's not just about this fight, right? It's other fighters. They're going to come up and say, how come you're doing this? How come you're doing that? I think that's why they didn't do the Francis Ngannou fight. But how many times are you going to be able to do that, right? Do you really want to be responsible for not putting this big fight together? We always hear him talk about boxing and how Pacquiao and Floyd happened way too late. Like, we don't want to be that, what we get over there in boxing. He's in a tough spot. He's in a pickle. And I feel like John Jones helped put him there too.
International Fight Week sound good to you, Danny? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I love the timeline. I do think it's got to be in Vegas. At this point, you have to give respect to John Jones. He is the A side 100%. And I think he's on point when he said after the fight on the post-fight press conference that, you know, he lives just fine without Tom Aspinall. He can retire and he's still considered the greatest of all time. Tom Aspinall needs him. So you have to go to Vegas for this one. And yeah, this is the fight to make. I'm a little less optimistic than you, Gigi. I don't know. Just John just didn't seem like he was too into it at the post-fight press conference, but maybe that's just public negotiating. I do think this fight happens, but it really seems like he's set on the Alex Pereira fight, and that's all he wants.
So you think the Aspinall Jones fight could fall apart then?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Oh wow. Okay. Wow.
I'm a little more optimistic. I do think they are going to find a way to make this happen. I mean, if you're Dana White and you have said endlessly, John Jones is the greatest fighter ever. He's the pound for pound. He's this, he's that. He's the best person to ever compete in any combat sport ever. And this proved it. Then you got to pay him as such. If it's $30 million, then you got to pay him the $30 million, whatever it is. If he is so great and this fight needs to happen the way you say it does, then you have to pay the man as such. Does anyone here think the UFC can afford it? Maybe they don't want to set precedents. Maybe they don't want to go that deep in the pockets, but it's time. If you really feel that John Jones is that amazing, that he's done all this for the sport, then compensate him and such. He deserves it. Dig into your pockets unlike you ever have before and make this fight happen. I don't think Tom Aspinall is going to be the one that would hold up this fight saying, you know, I need some ridiculous price tag. I think he'd maybe be willing to go a little lower than he would otherwise just to get Jones in a cage with him. And then all the upside comes after that with maybe a potential rematch or all this different stuff. But pay John Jones, give him what he deserves and make this fight happen.
Yeah, because I think they've underpaid him all of his life. And second of all, he's missed the prime years where he could have been really, really cashing big checks by doing this whole, I'm just going to give up this other title and buff up for heavyweight. And then these reported payouts of Tyson, Jake Paul, Francis Ngannou. You know, what really scares me, guys, is this fight could take place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, not Las Vegas. And that would be a bummer because I want to see it here in Las Vegas. But hey, real quick before we move on to the next topic, little respect towards Miocic. Yeah, I know he said he didn't look good, but this guy's had the best UFC heavyweight career I've witnessed, with 4 title defenses and the run that he went on. I think it was 2016, man. He had quite a year. He went to Brazil and won the title, you know, in enemy territory against Fabricio Verdum. And of course, that one year, I don't know if you guys remember, I think the Indians made it to the World Series and the Cavs won. So, I mean, this guy helped be part of that resurgence for, or whatever you want to call it, for the city of Cleveland. But any quick thoughts there goes on Stipe Miocic?
Well, I mean, obviously, I hate to see him go out this way, but I hope he's remembered as one of the best to ever do it, because he is. I hope he's remembered as a great ambassador for the sport, a good role model for others, and he's definitely Hall of Fame first ballot, right?
Oh, for sure, yeah. 1-1 against Ngannou, won the trilogy against Daniel Cormier, 4 title defenses, incredible. Yeah, we can't judge him on this one. Danny Segura, any quick thoughts on Stipe Miocic?
Well, yeah, no, he's one of the greatest to ever do it. Sad to see him go in that fashion, but I'm sure he got paid for this one. So, yeah, it's been time, and all the best to Stipe and whatever comes next in his career.
Yeah, we don't have time to discuss it right now, but I'm wondering if Miocic was underpaid all these years. How about you, Mike? Quick thoughts on Miocic's career?
They're all underpaid is the correct answer. But yes, I'm glad he at least got this platform. He got to fight a fellow all-time great in Jones in this arena, not going out in the apex, being knocked out by Francis Ngannou. So I know there's been some chats or comments in the chat there about, we wish he got like the send-off video we've seen some of these get. I wish they had that prepared. It's unfortunate it didn't happen, but you saw the praise on social media. There's been some other stuff put out by the UFC, and he will get his day of recognition when he is inducted in the UFC Hall of Fame, which is inevitable.
Yeah, and hopefully it's next year. Let's just get it done. All right, guys, moving on. Chucky Alus fought a brilliant fight against Michael Chandler. He was pretty much pitching a shutout, and then Chandler connected with a big punch in round 5, which definitely added to the drama. Let's talk about this co-main event, which definitely had its moments. Danny, your quick reaction to Oliveira versus Chandler.
More or less what I expected, but I thought that Oliveira was eventually going to get a win. A finish. He obviously got the win. I think both these fighters fought a little bit more tactical, a little bit more measured. In the past, we've seen them go a little bit more wild, and that was nice to see. Although it didn't work for Chandler this time around, he could have had a nice comeback there at the end, and he certainly kind of paced himself, and that's something that we've been begging him to do for the entirety of his UFC run. But yeah, and then I saw the same thing for Charles Oliveira, a guy that clearly is dangerous, is always looking for the finish, but he's fighting a little bit more measured. And I feel like not to the extent of Chandler, but like Chandler, has cost him some fights in the past. So it was a great performance. As I think you said earlier in the show, this really saved the card. It wasn't such a great card, but then once the co-main and main rolls out, we got some pretty good fights. So all in all, pretty happy with the showing both these guys displayed.
Goes, I think a lot of it had to do with Oliveira's wrestling, man. He was taking down the All-American.
Yeah, that's the thing is, the time off, right? It didn't seem to do Chandler well, but Oliveira just continues to improve. That's what's so scary for this division. So I think it was a little bit of both. But it was pretty one-sided until we got to those championship rounds. And even then, some people could even say, and I think it was a little obvious, there was some questionable things that even led to some of the positivity that went Michael Chandler's way. So I was a little disappointed in that part. But Charles Oliveira is a gangster, man. He's still improving. And I just wish he would speak a little English, man, to even capture the fans a little bit more. But I was really excited to see Michael Chandler come back, and just really excited to see Charles Oliveira take one more step.
I'm glad you added a little bit more, because in my opinion, he has captured the fans. I mean, he was popular at the press conference. He's the Brazilian, the other guy's the American, but he just seemed the more popular guy. But talk about his big win there, Mike. You were there in person.
Yeah, it was great performance. I mean, his first time ever going past a round 3, which is crazy to think about, given, you know, everything he's done, championship fights he's been in, and he looked really good out there. I mean, obviously had the slip up in round 5. How much of that, of course, Chandler hurt him, but we have to acknowledge the plethora of fouls he had throughout that fight, right? Like the eye pokes, the cage grabs, and then that 5th round. I don't know what the hell Keith Peterson was doing. I don't think you can call him no nonsense Keith Peterson anymore, because that was absolute nonsense. All those shots to the back of the head that he allowed Michael Chandler to do. So I don't know, like that takes some of the luster off. Obviously, I think Chandler kind of redeemed himself with those 2 big slams at the very end, made it really entertaining in the fans' eyes. But if none of that stuff happened there, like we're looking at a 5-0 shutout here. And I think it's a real bad look for Michael Chandler. So Oliveira, of course, deserves all the praise. It's hard to beat a guy a second time who you've already finished once before. Michael Chandler said he had the best training camp and the best preparation he's ever had, and the performance didn't align to that in the cage. And that was largely because Charles Oliveira had an answer to everything he had. He said in the media day, I am one step ahead of this guy always in the wrestling and the jiu-jitsu and the striking. And that proved to be a very accurate prediction.
Mike, can he beat the winner of Saruki and Makhachev? With Makhachev, it would be a rematch. But what are your thoughts? Has he improved enough that he's closed the gap on the champ? And can he take out the challenger should the challenger prevail?
Well, they'd both be rematches, right? He just lost to Saruki at 300. Yeah. So I think he can beat either of those guys. It's a tough task. They're both real good, man. But Charles Oliveira, how can you look at his resume with the most finishes, the most submissions, the most bonuses in UFC history and say he can't beat anyone on the right night? He is capable, but Islam Makhachev and Arman Sarukian are very good fighters, man. So those fights would be fascinating. I'd watch them any day of the week over and over, but it's going to be a tough out. But that's why it's the highest level of the division in a championship fight, because that's as good as it gets.
I just need one of you goes, Danny. What's next for Chandler, man? Connor, they said now they're putting him to the end of 2025. Let's just say he's retired. Max Holloway for BMF. Again, Chandler's fights, he's 2-4 in the UFC. He's a former champ of Bellator, but his fights are exciting. BMF, you guys like that for him at least, or do you have another name?
I like the name. I just don't like the fact that it's a BMF. That doesn't make much sense to me. I feel like they kind of owe him a little bit something, so I wouldn't be shocked if they made something like that. I mean, people would watch. It'd be entertaining.
Danny, who would you put up with Chandler if not Max Holloway?
I think the Conor fight makes just too much sense, which is probably why I think it won't happen. And it's kind of worrisome why Dana White says that we won't see Conor until the end of 2025.
At the end of 2025? Can you believe that?
I don't think Chandler's willing to wait that long. And even then, like, is there a guarantee? Like, are you holding your breath until that fight happens? No. So I think he should just move on. And I don't know. I think there's so many fights at 155 for him that are interesting. I don't know, put him up against a St. Denis. I don't know, put him up against some of these younger guys that are kind of outside of the top 10. I think that would make sense for him.
Bo Nickel, second time he's had prime real estate on a big UFC pay-per-view, 300, of course. Laid an egg there. He said it himself. And then in this fight, chose not to wrestle and show off his striking, which wasn't that impressive. And then Paul Craig wasn't impressive at all. I thought he had also an opportunity to kind of bring a resurgence to his career. Let's go back to Mike Bond, man. What was it like? Were you just like nodding off at some point during this fight?
No, it wasn't that bad from cage side. I mean, I don't know what the picture of the fight was being painted on the broadcast in terms of the commentary, but it was like a little captivating just to see if Bo would even try to wrestle at all. I get where he was coming from, like in the approach. You get 15 minutes to try to evolve your game, show off another element and not wrestle in there. I think in the long run, it is going to be good for him. But on this platform, on a big pay-per-view, Madison Square Garden, you're this huge favorite. It takes some of the steam off of it and ends up making you not look quite as good. So I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about Bo Nickel's career in a few years from now, this is just a blimp on the radar, just one fight in his career. And there'll be many more great performances that overshadow this one. But I think it's honestly a good thing for him. It kills some of the hype. It allows him to operate under a more normal career trajectory. And I think that's going to be good for his development. But yeah, he definitely has some work to do, man. Like I was talking to some people, I won't name names, but who are kind of around his team, and was being like, if he wins this fight, who would be like a good step up for him? And I mentioned like a Brad Tavares, and I got a look at me like I was crazy, and that was like too big of a jump. And that was kind of concerning, being like, is that really that big of a jump? And then you see this performance, you're like, maybe I kind of understand the reaction now.
Yeah, and maybe it's the fact that, even Nichols mentioned Hamzat's name. A lot of people have mentioned Hamzat's name, kind of like that same trajectory of two middleweights, right? But obviously he's proven that he's the real deal. Bo Nickel hasn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's tons of work to do still, but there's so much potential, right? It's difficult when you're learning on the job, especially when you're in the UFC. We weren't used to seeing that for a very long time. So he's got to do it in front of a lot of people, and sometimes it's not going to pan out like this particular fight. It's pretty crazy. If I were to tell you the fight wasn't what we expected, it wasn't entertaining, you probably would have expected that he wrestled the whole time, but he didn't. He stood there and he struck with the guy. So he's got more work to do. And if Brad Tavares, if that's too big of a jump, then don't mention Hamzat's name not for a very long time.
Danny, do you have a name for Bo Nickel?
I think I just keep him outside of the rankings, really. I think this performance, as Mike said, kind of killed some of the hype. And I did an exercise. I did a preview on my Spanish YouTube channel, Hablemos MMA, with UFC lightweight Claudio Puelles, where I would read every single name of the top 15 at middleweight and see who he would favor. Obviously talking about Bo Nickel, and there was like a good number of fighters that he would favor Bo Nickel to win. And now I don't know if he'll say the same thing. I think you just have to keep him away from the rankings. He's clearly a talent, but he needs time to develop. So anybody without a number next to their name, I think is a good next step.
I do think, just to last on that, there is an element of like him not being pushed, right? I do think if you gave him, like, I see someone mentioned like a Jack Hermanson or something, that might seem like a crazy leap, but I do think if he gets in a fight with someone who is seemingly like that level above, he rises to the level of the competition. He's just that type of competitor, that type of athlete. I think he needs to be pushed a little bit too. So I don't know. I do think like a step up would still be warranted here, even though this wasn't the greatest performance. I'd like to see him fight someone who can challenge him a little more, because I think the harder he gets pushed, the better you'll see him perform.
Perhaps that's true. I think one thing I was concerned about was his lack of wanting to even wrestle, and I think maybe an acknowledgement to Craig's talents. But I mean, Volkanovski went right after T-City, so if you're worried about triangles, then I don't know if you are looking to be the best in this sport, because you got to face them at some point. And there's a lot of people that offer a lot from the bottom, and there's been great fighters that attack that, But look, we got to get to the rest of the card. Any other highlights here from UFC 309, fellas, that you want to shed a spotlight on? Back to you, Danny Segura in Miami, Florida.
Shouts out to Jim Miller. He is 41 and still doing the damn thing, picking up first round stoppages. I mean, the guy's just ridiculous. His longevity in the sport is something to behold. And I know we always go back to this argument, like, is he UFC Hall of Fame worthy? But shit, he just keeps racking up all these stats. At some point, like, you got to recognize that what he's doing is incredibly difficult, despite him not being at a championship level. We saw how bad Stipe looked at heavyweight at 42. This guy is 41 and at lightweight, and he's absolutely killing it and looking good. So shouts out to Jim Miller.
He's an Iron Man. Yeah. How about you, Mike? Who do you want to shed a spotlight on from UFC 309?
Yeah, I mean, Jim Miller is the star of the undercard, I think, in my opinion. But since Danny covered that one well, I think Ramiz Brahimaj was a good one too. He had a good knockout of Mickey Gall. Our photographer, Per Holgestam, got an awesome shot of his like mouth guard getting punched out of his face. You can check that out on the gallery on MMA Junkie. That was a good win for him. I mean, he had never had a knockout finish before. So to get your first one like that, get a bonus, a good night for him, who famously was only known as the guy who had his ear like basically knocked off in the octagon however many years ago. So he comes back and gets a win like that. Good stuff.
Goes ahora tú.
Oban Elliott looked fantastic. It looked dialed in, very sharp. I think there's tons of potential there, so I can't wait to see him again. Plato in the chat though did I like what he's saying here about Romero on short notice. That guy
Yes.
did not stop coming forward, dude.
That guy was
He was
badass.
a
Yeah.
problem.
Stupid Plato took mine, man. There was times where I was watching Tabora and Denise, and then I was rubbernecking to see, oh, is Appalachian State losing by more than 50 now in college football? Because even that was more exciting. And then these guys, Onama and Romero, step in. I mean, they were cracking from the minute that they started the fight. It was just beautiful techniques. I think these are guys are welterweights, if I'm not mistaken, or lightweights. I don't know, whatever, right? Or 165. I don't know what it was, but it was beautiful. Romero went after him, and Onama was a big favorite, but he made it a fight. Guys, pour it out there, man, especially when you're on these big cards. Some of these guys that they just stand there with their hands and trudge along. It's so slow and painful at times. But thank you, Onama and Romero, for waking us up. Danny, you want to say something?
Yeah, lastly, shouts out to James Jontob from Peru. He's 0-3 in
Yeah.
the UFC, but I really hope he gets another shot because that dude's tough as shit.
He
put
was.
on
He
a
wouldn't
great
stop going
performance
forward.
despite taking it on just a few days' notice, and I hope he gets one more shot.
Yeah, he needs to tighten up, though. He's soft like me. He needs to tighten up a little bit, I think.
I mean, he
Maybe
wasn't
drop
getting
a
ready
weight
for a
class.
camp. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
The
if you
Peruvian
compare it
side.
to that Romero fellow that you just mentioned, that guy flew in to New York on Thursday and made weight on Friday, and then you have Lontop there, who it was supposed to be 155, got moved up to 165, then still missed weight. But I do think, even though 0-3, it's usually a 4-fight contract. I think they'll honor that 4th fight for him.
He did fight, though. Yeah, we'll give him his due in that regard. All right. Let's see here. Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. Another big fight this past weekend. Believe it or not, Friday's fight night had a bigger audience in stadium, in arena, if you want to call it. They said 70,000 and change were in attendance at Cowboy Stadium. They call it AT&T Stadium. Unfortunately, in my opinion, this fight was kind of a dud. But, two big names, polarizing names in pop culture. I actually thought it was worse than what I was expected, but I sat through it. Okay, reactions real quick. Goes, your thoughts on this boxing match?
Yeah, it was very bittersweet experience that night, right? I mean, a lot of takeaways. Netflix, for starters, they're just not ready for big sports. That kind of soured the night a lot, seeing everybody complaining on social media. I think we didn't have it as bad as a lot of other people, but we missed out on a couple rounds just because of that connection. And then look, I'll tell you, Mike Tyson, the biggest shot that he landed the whole weekend was at the weigh-in, right? The slap. That was probably his highlight.
Yeah.
The fight itself just was not good, man. It really was. When you look at it, he was 58 years old, and he was lumbering through there. And Jake Paul going to the cards and winning, that's almost not a win for him, really. That's how bad it looked. But the bright spot and everything was the Amanda Serrano fight and Katie Taylor.
Yeah.
Holy crap. Like that,
True.
I'll say it. That wasn't boxing. That was a fight. Those two stood in
Mhm.
front of each other and just wailed on each other. That was great. And even in the undercard, there was some good high-level boxing. So it was entertaining and it was worth your time. It's just, the main event, when it doesn't deliver, you just walk out so dejected. And on top of that, all the issues that they had, it was rough, man.
Yeah. How about you, Mike? What did you think of that boxing match? Did you get together with the boys in NYC?
So it was a bit of a weird experience for us. One of the managers that we know well in the industry had like a family friend who owned a bar in New York, and a bunch of people ended up going there. I was out for dinner before, so I basically got there like right as the main event was going, and the streaming problems were a massive issue for everyone in there. Like, it ended up being like pockets of people throughout the room are watching it on their phones, because one TV is like round 2 with 2 minutes left. The next TV is round 3 with 30 seconds in. And then you're watching your phone and it's round 4. And it's just like, it was a complete crapshoot in that regard. So I'm standing there in the corner watching it with Dan Ige, friend of the program. And we're just like, by round 5, we're like, ooh, this thing is pretty inevitable where it's going here. And it felt like maybe Jake had stopped throwing that right hand as much as he was early in the fight. Felt like Mike had like one good punch attempt in him in that round 1. And then after that, it got pretty sad. So yeah, in a way, kind of what you expected. I don't know if you believe that Jake, when he says he carried him through this fight, I'm kind of inclined to. It felt like he could have done something different later in that fight if he wanted to. So I don't know. It is what it is, I guess. Probably should have never happened, considering what Mike Tyson said in his statement afterwards, that he almost died over the summer and needed 8 blood transfusions. There's a whole other argument about Texas licensing this thing and whatnot. So it was a bit of a crapshoot there. I'm just glad it's over and we can kind of move on. And Mike Tyson seemingly checked that box of one more fight, got a huge payday, which you could be happy about, given some of the stuff that happened earlier in his career, having money robbed from him and things like that. So I don't know. There's a lot of different contexts you can put this in, but I'm more just glad it's over.
And if you believe the paydays that are out there, I heard Serrano and Taylor also got paid. So kudos to those ladies. Danny Segura, your thoughts on this boxing match?
So I watched about halfway. I got to round 4 or so, and then I just couldn't take it anymore. I mean, it just looked like Jake Paul was carrying him. Tyson looked awful. I mean, at almost 60 years old, that's exactly what you expected. And it just felt gross watching that so-called professional fight. So I knew exactly the way it was going to go. So I just decided to call it a night, and I dipped out. But yeah, this is the ugly side of combat sports. I don't want to see this ever again. I'm generally not a big hater of Jake Paul, but like these type of things, like, and sadly, this was probably the introduction or one of the few introductions that people have had to combat sports, given the platform size. So yeah, not a big fan of it. Kind of gross.
I don't think any of us want Mike Tyson to continue, so I won't even ask that question. About Jake Paul, back to MMA, pick a younger dude, obviously, hopefully not. I guess he's got to pick on retired MMA guys, because otherwise, if they're that good, they'd still be in MMA. Or is there? I mean, do you guys dabble in the boxing world too much to even give me a name from there? Let's just go with you guys.
He's really running out of options that I think are going to get people to want to pay for something.
Don't say Canelo either, please. Nobody say
no.
Canelo.
Canelo's name
don't say Canelo. Hit the like button, but don't say Canelo.
It's absolutely ridiculous. For one, Canelo would never ever do it, but if he did, he would absolutely get tooled up. It's just he's running out of options right now. I mean, maybe try and go back towards a boxer again, but a lot of people don't really care when he does that, right? So, and it was his one loss, so he's probably got to look again to some of these aging MMA guys. Nate Diaz taking out Jorge Masvidal, that would have been a fresh matchup. And as much as you say, don't say Canelo Alvarez, don't say Conor McGregor's name either. I don't see anything like that happening.
Mike, you got some thoughts?
You say don't mention Canelo, but I actually think that one does have a chance of happening next, especially if Netflix wants to continue to be involved, right? Like they're not going to do Jake Paul versus Darren Till or something like that, right? Like they want something that meets the level of this, and Canelo is probably one of the few options out there. That may be the end of the Jake Paul experience, but Jake Paul's been calling for that fight for years now. And I think even if he went out there and got completely destroyed, he would be like, I checked all the boxes I want in boxing, and that might be it for him. So if you're like someone who wants this whole thing to be over, maybe that's the fight you should be rooting for, because you would think Canelo would have his way with him in pretty devastating fashion. And then maybe that's kind of the end of this whole thing. But I don't think that is out of the realm, especially if Netflix wants to continue to be involved in Jake Paul fights.
Danny, you got any ideas?
No, I don't. I just hope it's probably about 40 years old. Really, just tired of watching these kind of gimmicky fights. Not into them.
Yeah, dude, he can only beat Canelo if he goes in the locker room and stabs him in the ribs, like in the movie Gladiator, when Commodus stabbed what's his face?
I think even
Russell
then,
Crowe.
I don't know.
And then Russell Crowe came out like at 50% of himself, and it was still a fight, and he still lost. But yeah, man. Oh my God. I'm glad people get paid. I'm glad there's new fans. We had great traffic, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, some of this stuff is painful. We need to get back to just the best fighting.
Of those 60 million people that watch, like how many of those that were, say, just casual fans or our parents who wanted some nostalgia with Mike Tyson, are they following the sport of boxing? Did this like do anything in terms of creating more fans? That's the big question, right?
What about KSI?
Yeah, I mean, that one's always there, I think. I don't know how interested he is in boxing anymore. But yeah, that's always one. I think if you're a fan of the origins of the Jake Paul story,
Yeah.
that's something you can do at any point.
Crazy. And just so everyone knows, KSI fought Logan Paul in the first of these YouTube versus YouTuber, right? Is that the history of it all?
Yep. I think so, yeah.
And then Jake Paul came into the fold and all that good stuff. All right. But yeah, again, 70,000 packed the arena. Netflix doesn't sound like it's getting good reviews here amongst any of us. Did you like anything of it, guys? I didn't even like the audio that was coming through. The announced team was, Morrow always delivers. Rosie Perez was them taking a shot, but I thought she could have maybe been part of a host desk. I don't think I needed to hear her, deliver the play-by-play. I do like the 3-man booth, whether it's, a man, 2 men and a woman, whatever. So I always like Roy Jones's input. I'll just take, I think, an Al Bernstein or someone else. But any just quick thoughts on Netflix being involved, and do you want to see it involved? Remember, this is a potential suitor for the UFC because the UFC supposedly is negotiating, right? Now that the contracts are running out with ESPN, they could take their talents, to different places like the NFL. Mike?
Yeah, no, I asked Dana pretty much that exact question at the post-fight press conference, and he reiterated, they do their own production in the UFC, and that's not something they'd ever hand over. But of course, we're referring more to like the buffering issues and all that kind of stuff going on. That's something they'll definitely have to sort out. But as Dana said in his post-fight as well, when he was answering that, like, this is kind of an experimental stage. This is as big as it gets. We'll see what happens with NFL on Christmas Day, I believe. WWE is going to be going there with Monday Night Raw starting in 2025. And then I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to follow. So definitely some work to do on that front. But I imagine if, like, say, UFC did go there, the actual broadcast experience would be more or less exactly the same as what we've come to expect over the last 20 years from them.
Mike, I want to stick with you on. Go ahead, Goes.
I was going to say, I think if Netflix does keep venturing out on their own and doing things like that, the broadcast team, they do have to kind of figure that out, because when Serrano and Taylor were going at it, there just wasn't much from a technical side to really use Roy Jones at that moment. And it was kind of taking away from what Mauro Ranallo does so well, right? His iconic voice and how he makes you feel in the moment. This is the most important thing you need to be seeing. There were times where they had to kind of shelve him because the other two were speaking up and they really weren't offering much as to what was going on. You needed Mauro Ranallo's voice. You needed that to be part of when you go back and watch that fight, the highlights, to hear that voice and what you were seeing on the screen had to go together. So they had to kind of figure that part out.
Also, some food for thought. I don't know what platform today can also take like 60 million viewers or at least 60 million households. I also think that just spoke about how big the fight was. I think if ESPN Plus were to do the same numbers, they would probably crash too. It's not really like a Netflix issue. It's just they're so massive that just bringing in live sports is going to be entirely difficult.
Guys, you would all agree, though, that even though the fight stunk, it was more palatable because we didn't have to pay $80 or $100 for it. It was kind of like, you just laugh it off, change the channel, versus being really livid. I mean, if you're throwing your remote at the TV or at the wall because, you just threw out some steak dinners, but that helped. But I love the future of Netflix. If they want to do this, they just have to tighten some things up. And if the UFC elects to go there for part of their Fight Night series or Dana White, I don't know. I think they'll do well. I'm glad the UFC will handle it. Let's stick to some other news. I want to go back to Mike because we talked a little bit pregame here about the fight gloves. The fight gloves are back, but not yet because they don't have enough of them apparently. So I want you to clear that up for the audience since you were there. You overheard all this. We will see them back, but I guess slowly but surely. And the complaints, fingers. Tell us about all this with the UFC gloves. Apparently the experiment is over with the new ones.
Yeah, pretty much over. I do think they went into this with good intentions, right? They wanted to do something to make it better for the fighters, to reduce eye pokes, to make it more comfortable, all that stuff. And Dana White admitted pretty much at the post-fight the other night that it was a failure. The fighter reviews were not good. There is a whole set of data to look at about like less knockouts. I think it was like 10% less in these months since they went in. I sent some of that data that I'd collected to the UFC at their request. I don't know how much that actually played a part in this. I don't think really at all. I think it was more the fighter feedback. And you hear, like you saw when Ariel Helwani first reported, I think on Thursday or Friday, whenever it was, that this change was happening. And then we confirmed it and we put out our social media graphics and stuff. Go like look on Instagram in the comments section of our outlet, Ariel, anyone else. And there's at least like 10, 15 fighters in every comment section being like, hell yeah, like new gloves suck, this, that, or the other thing. So there's definitely like a yield of support from the athletes to make that change. And I think the UFC, credit to them, admits when they're wrong, admits like, we can make a reversion. This isn't something they're glued into. It's the same manufacturer who produced the previous gloves. The issue is right now, from what Dana said, they don't have enough of the old gloves to fill out all the upcoming cards. So they're going to use old gloves on UFC 310, December 7th, the final pay-per-view. And then the rest of the year, the fight night cards, the ESPN cards will be the new gloves. And I think that's basically just going to be the case until they can get enough manufactured to have everything be back. So the photos in 10 years time of fighters wearing gold gloves in championship fights in that brief window will be like a nostalgia trip and just a weird kind of moment being like, oh, those gold gloves, but that is not going to be commonplace going forward from the appearance of it.
Oh, you could still spray them gold, right? Just use the old gloves. Right?
It doesn't seem, I think they were asked directly if there'll be gold gloves and Dana was like, no. So I think it's going to be the traditional black for everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Speaking of UFC 310, it's been reshuffled. It's no longer Belal Muhammad versus Shavkat Rakhmonov for the undisputed welterweight title. Muhammad is hurt, but they will keep Rakhmonov on the card, not in an interim capacity. He will be facing Ian Gary. They will go 5 rounds. And this is the co-main event now of UFC 310. Elevated to the main event is Alexander Pantoja versus Kai Asakura, coming in from Rizin in a fighting federation in Japan. Goes, what are your thoughts on this reshuffle? Do you like them keeping Rakhmonov and adding Gary? I only ask that because it doesn't seem like Muhammad's going to be out that long, and a title shot's a title shot. You got to, in a way, praise Rakhmonov for stepping up like that, but could he be blowing it too?
Possibly. I think the real winner is Belal Muhammad, because maybe one of these guys gets knocked off, right? It's one less guy he has to face. But the fight itself, it not being interim, I get it. I think that's a good move by the UFC. I think that's something that they need to do going forward a little bit more often, because Belal wants to be active and he's going to be ready. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. I still feel like Shavkat is in the lead, in my opinion. I still want to see more from Ian Gary at high levels, but it's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm. Danny, did you agree with the way they reshuffled it? Should Rakhmonov have held off for his title shot? Sometimes the UFC doesn't like that either, so I could see him being coerced into taking this.
I think it worked out perfectly. I think if I would have been in charge of the UFC, I would have done exactly those moves. In fact, I suggested it on the last or 2 episodes ago, whenever we found out about Belal's injury, that they should pull one of, whether it was Buckley or Ian Gary, they should pull one of those and put him against Shavkat. So yeah, I absolutely love the fight, undefeated versus undefeated. And yeah, I think it makes all the sense in the world to book those 2 guys for a title, a proper title eliminator. And I hope they at least put that label on, because I think that's important to have. And I also love the fact that Colby Covington, who I often not give a lot of credit to, is taking on a young guy in Joaquin Buckley, like a fresh face in the division. He was calling out Stephen Wonderboy Thompson before. I hated that call out. So I'm glad that, we're getting a proper also main event there for Joaquin Buckley, who's deserving of a big name.
Exactly. So Gary's out of the Buckley fight on December 14th, 1 week later in Tampa Bay after the pay-per-view here in Las Vegas, and stepping in will be Colby Covington against Joaquin Buckley. Mike, you like that reshuffle there in Tampa?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, that was like my kind of surprise of the weekend in terms of all the news that Colby Covington took this fight. There's been a lot of criticism from a lot of people about him, rightfully so, if you look at kind of the resume in recent years, but this has to shut all the people up. He's fighting someone relevant, younger, all that stuff on a nice streak. So credit to Colby, and we'll see what he can do. If he wins this, he's kind of back in a conversation. And if he loses, who knows where that sends him. But I appreciate him taking the risk. This is the right thing to do with his career, and we'll see what happens. And then, yeah, for 310, definitely the right call with this fight. Simon Simano, our editor on Overreaction Time, was kind of really campaigning for this Shavkat versus Gary fight before anything was announced. And here we go. We got it. As to Danny's point, Dana did say that this is a number one contender fight. He laid it out perfect. I thought promoted it great. 33-0 combined. Neither of these guys have had a 5-round fight before. They're going to get that experience before going into a championship bout. It all makes sense to me. So really think they did a good job executing all this. The welterweight division has been a crapshoot, to say the least, over the last 5 years or so, getting some of these fights made. So big ups to Dana and Sean Shelby and Hunter Campbell for kind of finally creating what should be some real movement in the weight class. And curious now to see where Kamaru Usman falls and everything.
Good stuff, guys. All right, I want to give a yellow card to myself for not going to the chat one time on today's show. Guys, I'm going to go and look at your questions and comments, and I will answer them in the comments section. And if you want to leave another additional question and comment in the comment section, do so. I'll get in there. I get in there every week and answer pretty much all of them, or at least as many as I can. But you guys definitely are a part of the show. It's just that these guys were on fire, and there was a lot to talk about. And I want to end real quick. Just some quick plugs. Danny hosts Hablemos MMA on YouTube. Check it out. For those of you that speak Spanish, you will love it. It has interviews, reactions, things like that. Our guy Cold Coffee, he also has the MMA Road Show. Check out his show. He's had it for years. The MMA Road Show. He pretty much delivers every weekend and gives us these great B-rolls here that accompany the show, where you can't get that anywhere else. As they're talking, you're seeing the stuff that happened in New York. Mike Bond has the Bonfire. Has just launched. I believe they're on episode 4 or 5. He's off to a great start. And Mike, congrats as well. You had a big week out there at the Empire State Building. My man's engaged. That's it. All the ladies can't chase him down no more. He's been corralled. And of course, Goes and I host MMA Junkie Radio Mondays and Thursdays here on the site. Look, on the way out, if you can hit the like button and subscribe, we would greatly appreciate it. Lots of cool content every day of the 365 days we hustle over here at MMA Junkie. So if you could do that for us, we'll do the rest. It's free. Just subscribe and like, and we'll take care of the rest. And we'll see you next week, Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, for another edition of Spinning Back Clique. Take care, folks.